The entire country can be taken out in one night, and that night might be tomorrow night. That was the level of warning hanging in the air as the Easter weekend turned into something far more dangerous. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Americans, and above all, the brave warriors serving in the armed forces, the United States military had once again demonstrated why it is still regarded as the greatest fighting force the world has ever known. In two extraordinary combat search and rescue operations deep inside enemy territory in Iran, American forces carried out missions with breathtaking skill, courage, and precision. And when those warriors are unleashed, really unleashed, they are unstoppable. Then came the moment the entire region seemed to freeze. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps activated its full coastal defense network along the Strait of Hormuz. Anti-ship missile batteries were raised into firing position. Radar dishes began rotating above hardened concrete bunkers overlooking the waterway. Iranian fast attack boats moved in tight formation just outside the 12-mile limit. At its narrowest point, the strait is only 21 miles wide. But the real issue was never just geography. The real issue was control. 40% of the world's seaborne oil passes through that channel, and now, suddenly, nothing was moving. At naval installations across the region, the alert arrived at the same time. Combat readiness. All units. Immediate effect. The alarm tore across the bases. Within minutes, every unit was in motion. At a classified forward staging base, the mission brief had already begun. A SEAL team commander stood over a digital map table. Behind him, the Strait of Hormuz glowed across a large screen. Red markers identified 3 primary target sets: anti-ship missile batteries at 2 separate coastal positions, a surface search radar complex on a rocky promontory, and a hardened underground command node positioned 2 kilometers inland from the shoreline. All 3 had to be neutralized before the fleet could move. That was the mission. No room for delay, no room for error. The SEALs listened in silence. No one wrote anything down. Everything was committed to memory. Then the platoon moved to the equipment staging area. Every item was laid out in exact order across the floor. Dry suits, dive rigs, closed circuit rebreathers. No bubbles. No surface signature. Every piece of equipment was checked twice. Regulators tested. Tanks verified. Buoyancy compensators adjusted and secured. Combat loads were assembled separately with the same cold precision. Suppressed rifles, sidearms, laser designators, thermal optics, encrypted radios, and demolition charges. The team worked methodically. Each man checked his own gear, then checked the gear of the man beside him. That detail mattered. But what is worth noticing is that in missions like this, survival begins long before the first shot is fired. On the flight line, 4 F-35C Lightning. 2 aircraft were being brought to combat readiness. Ground crews operated under portable lighting. The aircraft sat low and angular, their surfaces absorbing light instead of reflecting it. Weapons technicians rolled loading carts into position beneath the fuselage bays. Internal weapons bay doors were already open. GBU-31, Joint Direct Attack munitions, were lifted into place and locked onto the internal pylons. Each weapon was linked directly into the aircraft's targeting electronics. Data links were confirmed. Arming pins inserted, red flags hanging in plain view. Engine intake covers were removed. Avionics panels were opened, checked, then sealed again. Each aircraft received a complete inspection, system by system, before a single pilot even touched the cockpit ladder. Then the pilots arrived. They climbed into the cockpits and moved through startup sequences with deliberate calm. Displays came alive. Sensor fusion systems initialized. The F-35's active electronically scanned array radar came online. Distributed aperture system cameras confirmed full spherical situational awareness around each aircraft. Pilot and crew chief worked the checklist side by side. The crew chief standing on the ladder, the pilot inside the glass canopy. Every system confirmed. Every weapon verified hot on the display. Then the ground crew dropped down, ladder removed, canopy closed. From that moment on, the aircraft were no longer being prepared. They were ready. At the waterline, 2 combat rubber raiding craft were lowered from the well deck of an amphibious assault ship. The SEALs boarded in full dive kit. The boats pushed off from the hull and moved slowly toward the coast with no lights at all. 3 miles out, the engines were cut. The boats drifted in silence. Then the SEALs rolled backward into the water without making a sound. The surface closed over them. closed-circuit rebreathers produced no exhaust bubbles, no trace, no signature, nothing visible in the black water. The team descended to operating depth and began moving toward shore on a pre-plotted compass bearing. Overhead, the F-35s were already airborne and on station. They held at altitude, fully passive. No radar emissions. Sensors only receiving. The aircraft's electronic warfare suite was scanning the electromagnetic environment below. Iranian radar signals were being cataloged in real time. Frequency, pulse width, scan rate. The targeting computers built a full picture of the air defense network without ever transmitting a signal that could be detected. And really, that is what made the difference. Not noise, not spectacle, pure control. The SEAL team surfaced 50 meters from the shoreline. They stayed low in the water and scanned the beach through night vision binoculars. The coast appeared clear, so they moved in. Fins came off at the waterline. Dive rigs were cached beneath rocks above the tide mark. Combat loads were checked again. Weapons transitioned from safe to ready. Then the team moved inland in a tight column, using broken ground and scrub brush for cover. Movement was slow. Every step was deliberate. No sound beyond the wind. At a pre-designated rally point, the team split into two elements. The primary element advanced toward the first target, an anti-ship missile battery positioned on a raised rocky platform overlooking the strait. The support element remained concealed, maintaining radio contact and covering the approach route. The primary element reached an observation position 40 meters from the battery. The laser designator operator settled in behind a boulder, powered on the targeting device, and placed the beam on the center of the missile launcher assembly, invisible to the naked eye. But above him, inside the cockpit, the F-35 pilot's helmet-mounted display picked up the designation immediately. The first GBU-31 was released. It dropped cleanly from the internal bay. The bay doors closed in under a second. The aircraft's radar cross-section returned to baseline before the weapon had even traveled 100 meters. The JDAM glided on a GPS-corrected trajectory toward the laser spot below. The SEAL operator watched through his thermal scope. Then impact. Direct, precise, contained. The missile battery was destroyed in the blast, and secondary explosions confirmed the onboard missiles had cooked off. The operator keyed his radio and transmitted a single word. The strike had begun. The primary element repositioned immediately after the strike. Standard procedure. No more than 30 seconds at any observation point after a weapon impact. They moved 200 meters along the ridgeline to a secondary observation position. From there, the second target came into view. A surface search radar array mounted on a concrete platform. Generators were still running. The antenna rotated with steady rhythm, sweeping the darkness as if nothing had happened. But the truth was, that system was already living on borrowed time. The laser designator operator set up again. His partner covered the approach routes with a suppressed rifle, scanning for any movement, any shift, any sign that the enemy had realized what was unfolding around them. The designation was placed directly on the radar pedestal mounting. Then the call went up to the F-35 overhead. A second F-35 turned in from a different approach vector. Same sequence, internal bay, JDAM release. GPS guidance with laser terminal correction. Clean, silent, efficient, then the hit landed. The radar array stopped rotating in mid-sweep. The antenna folded in on itself. The generator building behind it disappeared into the blast. In one instant, the Iranian early warning network along that section of coastline lost its primary sensor node. And that changed everything. Fighter aircraft and surface vessels operating in the strait would now be blind to anything approaching from the south. That was not just a tactical gain. It was a rupture in the entire defensive picture. But the third target was the real heart of the mission. This underground command node sat beneath a reinforced concrete structure 2 kilometers inland from the coast. Vehicle tracks led toward a hardened entrance cut into the hillside. A generator exhaust vent could be seen on the surface. 2 armed sentries were posted at the entrance. From a ridgeline observation point, the SEAL element studied the objective through thermal imaging. Additional personnel were visible inside the structure. The command node was active. Communications equipment was transmitting. This was the nerve center coordinating Iranian coastal defense activity across the sector. Not a supporting node, not a backup site, the nerve center. For a moment, the demolition charge option was considered. Then it was set aside. The structure was too hardened for direct assault with the team's current load. That mattered. But what is even more important is that elite units do not force a bad option just to appear aggressive. They shift, they adapt, they choose the strike that works. And here, the decision went to air. The F-35s carried a GBU-57 equivalent penetrator, configured for hardened targets. The pilot confirmed weapon availability. On the ground, the SEAL team marked the entrance coordinates using precision GPS. The data was transmitted directly into the aircraft's fire control system. In the cockpit, the pilot configured the weapon for delayed fusing, maximum penetration before detonation. The weapon would either drive through the reinforced entrance or punch through the hardened ceiling before initiating. One pass, one chance. No wasted motion. The strike came in on a single run. The F-35 descended to release altitude, dropped the penetrator on the GPS coordinates, then climbed immediately back to altitude. The weapon slammed into the reinforced structure. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Just a hard impact and a strange silence. Then, the detonation erupted below ground. The blast vented through the entrance and the exhaust ports. The structure did not burst outward. It imploded. That detail is what made the effect so devastating. The command node went offline immediately. Iranian coastal defense coordination in the sector ceased within seconds. Radar screens went dark. Radio nets fell silent. Missile battery operators lost contact with their command authority. Just like that, a network built to shut the strait had been cut at the throat. With the targets neutralized, the SEAL elements converged on the pre-designated extraction point, a flat stretch of ground near the shoreline, 300 meters from the nearest structure. The team established a defensive perimeter and waited, weapons pointed outward, eyes fixed on every possible approach route. No wasted movement, no talking. Only the disciplined tension of men who knew the mission was not over until the last rotor blade carried them back out. 2 minutes later, rotor noise drifted in from the south. An MH-60 approached low and blacked out. The crew chief monitored the final approach through night vision. The helicopter came in hard and fast, landing with rotors still at full RPM. The SEALs broke from the perimeter and sprinted to the aircraft. Last man aboard. The helicopter lifted before the ramp was fully closed. Then it banked south and accelerated away from the coast at low level, disappearing back into the darkness. And below, the balance of the strait had already changed. In the waterway, the carrier strike group began to move. Destroyers took point position. The aircraft carrier increased speed to transit pace. F-35s remained overhead in combat air patrol. The route ahead was now clear. Iranian coastal defense assets in that sector had been destroyed or rendered inoperable. Surface radar coverage along the northern shore had opened a gap of 60 kilometers. No anti-ship missile battery in the sector still had functional command and control. The fleet entered the strait in formation. This was the moment everything shifted. Not in theory, not on paper. In real time, the closure had been broken. The fleet moved through the strait in disciplined formation. Destroyers held the lead. The carrier pressed forward at transit speed. Overhead, F-35s maintained combat air patrol, sealing the airspace above the waterway that only hours earlier had been threatened by Iranian coastal defenses. What had looked like a choke point on the edge of paralysis was now being forced back open by precision, timing, and overwhelming coordination. And really, that is the part that matters most. Not just that the defenses were hit, but that they were erased in exactly the sequence required to change the entire situation before dawn. Iranian coastal defense assets in the sector had been destroyed or reduced to silence. Surface radar coverage along the northern shore now had a gap of 60 kilometers. No anti-ship missile battery remaining in that zone had functional command and control. That meant the old threat picture no longer existed. It had collapsed, piece by piece, target by target. First the launcher, then the radar, then the underground nerve center that tied the whole defense network together. The result was not partial disruption, it was operational blindness. And once that blindness set in, the strait was no longer closed. Signals went out to tankers and commercial shipping. The message was simple: the channel is open. The first oil tanker cleared the narrow point at 0542 local time. That moment carried enormous weight, because the world had been watching that waterway as if the global economy itself were holding its breath. At its narrowest point, the Strait of Hormuz is only 21 miles wide, yet it carries 40% of the world's seaborne oil. For hours, nothing had moved. Now, movement had returned. Not cautiously, not symbolically, for real. By dawn, 12 vessels were transiting under naval escort. Global shipping resumed. The strait was open. That is how the operation ended. Not with speeches, not with hesitation. With a carrier strike group moving forward, destroyers screening the route, stealth fighters overhead, and oil tankers once again passing through one of the most critical maritime corridors on Earth. But what is worth noticing is how fast the entire equation changed. One moment, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps had activated its full coastal defense network, raised anti-ship missile batteries, spun radar dishes over hardened bunkers, and deployed fast attack boats outside the 12-mile limit. The next, those same defenses were cut apart by a mission executed with ruthless precision. The sequence never broke, the mission brief, the memorized target sets, the dry suits and rebreathers. The combat rubber raiding craft drifting 3 miles out, the black water, the 50-meter surface point near shore, the laser designations, the GBU-31 strikes, the hardened penetrator, the implosion of the command node, the extraction under rotor wash. Then the fleet drive through the open channel, every phase connected to the next, every action pushed toward the same outcome. And that outcome was unmistakable. The waterway ahead was clear, the fleet moved, the oil moved, the world moved again. That is why these operations were described as extraordinary combat search and rescue missions, carried out deep inside enemy territory in Iran, with breathtaking skill, courage, and precision. Because in the end, the mission was not simply about destroying targets. It was about restoring passage through a maritime artery the entire world depends on. It was about proving, once again, what happens when a force with this level of training, coordination, and reach is fully unleashed. The Strait of Hormuz had been closed. By dawn, it was open. If you made it this far, drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, and subscribe for more deep coverage like this.